with over 15 million procedures being performed in 2019 just in the United States alone, and rhinoplastic surgery making up the majority of this. People are having more surgeries now than ever before. As it turns out, climate has a huge influence in how your nose is shaped. For example, the sharp upturned peaks of Scandinavian noses compared to the flat and wide shapes of sub-Saharan African ones. The nose of individuals are heavily shaped by genetic influences of their ancestors, which in turn have gone through a process of natural selection across generations to best adapt to their climate. In the tropics, where the air is warm, evolutionary changes have occurred over time, affecting the nose of their inhabitants, with noses that are more flat with nostrils open and wide, acting as a favorable genetic marker. Quite simply put, the greater width of the nose base increases the potential intake of air needed in warmer climates, and has hence served as an evolutionary advantage for populations living in the tropics. By getting a larger volume of air in, you can exercise longer and faster than everyone else. If we were to place individuals with this open and wide nose evolutionary trait in colder climates, the increased potential intake of air would serve as an evolutionary disadvantage, allowing masses of cold air to enter and irritate the lining of your nose. A landmark research article by Zaidi et al. Speaks to this case that adaptations to climate have caused observable differences in nose shapes among populations all over the world. The study included 2,637 participants with relevant genetic ancestry data, which is quite impressive because this culturally diverse sample comes exclusively from the United States. To give context to this paper, genetic scientists have been studying and measuring noses and extracting meaning from their results for quite a while now, with Thompson and Buxton publishing a historic paper in 1923. The paper demonstrated significant differences between 242 different crania, aka skulls, by using a mathematical nasal index, finding ethnic differences for crania composition. For example, the skull on the left is a Algonquin Indian exhibiting a narrow nose with a nasal index of 39.4. On the other hand, the right is a Northwest Australian with a wide nose and an index of 55.4. Very clearly there are obvious differences, and so this is just one of those ways to measure how much of a difference it is. Close to a century later, in 2017, Zaidi et al. Has improved the sophistication of Thompson and Buxton's measuring techniques to prove variation in nose shapes between West African, East Asian, Northern European, and South Asian populations by statistically modeling 3D images of participants using their own system. With the ability to model noses using imaging systems, 5 nasal distances and 2 areas from every nose were measured to quantitatively compare how size and shape can change between anthropological groups. These distances include the nares width, a measurement of the distance between the 2 nose wings, as shown in this picture, the alar base width, which is quite similar to the nares width, but it measures from the base of the nose instead, the nasal height, which is measured from the top of the nose, aka the nasion, and to the bottom, the subnasal, and the nasal ridge length, which is measured from the top of the nose, so again the nasion, to the pronasal, which is the tip of your nose. And the final distance, the nasal tip, or the protrusion, which is taken from the point of the nose, so again the pronasal, to the bottom, the subnasal. For each nose, they also took the area of the nose, which is the nostril, and that's shown on screen. So what follows now is the collated data for the nose shape and size of each ethnic population. You can pause the video here to make your own inferences from the graphs that are provided, but a summarized table will better detail the findings from this dataset. From the report, it can be seen that West Africans have the largest nares width, the alar base width, and the smallest nasal tip protrusion, so this correlates to a flat and wide nose. On the other hand, Northern Europeans have the smallest nose width, with the smallest nares width and the base width, with the greatest nasal tip protrusion. This gives way to a tall, pointed, and thin nose. East Asians were also found to have the smallest noses in terms of external surface area, and the smallest nasal tip protrusion. This results in a small and short nose. So to summarize what the data is telling us, West Africans, males and females, have the largest nose widths, Northern European men and women have the smallest, East Asian men and West African females have the greatest nasal height, whilst South Asians have the smallest nasal height. Now, with all of this data modeling complete and analyzed, the The researchers of this paper set out to find that the differences in nose shape and size between African, Asian, and European populations was due to evolutionary benefits unique to each of those climates and not just random chance. In other words, the noses were due to differing climates and not something known as genetic drift. Genetic drift is when frequencies of a certain characteristic change over generations due to chance. In the ladybug example, the chance event of a group of bugs being swatted has resulted in a population decrease in blue bugs. When it comes time to reproduce, only a small amount will continue to hold the blue trait. Over time, by chance, the overall characteristic of the population will change. You have to remember that genetic drift is unlikely in a large sample size. To recognize which measurements of the nose size and shape had differences that can't be attributed to genetic drift alone, the authors of the paper comprised a formula and statistical procedure that assessed the variation of the datasets. The actual formula is quite complex, so we're going to skip that here. But statistically significant results from the dataset found through probability values of less than 0.05. So in other words, there's a less than 5% chance that we are wrong in assuming that this data is meaningful. In statistics, this is called a p-value, and it means that these differences are caused by climate and not just random chance. In this graph, the QST on the y-axis refers to the formula that we previously skipped over, with larger resultant values from the formula corresponding to smaller p-values, and hence more evidence that there is something beyond genetic drift. The red and orange violin-shaped plots represent skin pigmentation, nares width, alar base width, and nasal tip protrusion, and these are the measurements that are found to have significant effects beyond, again, genetic drift. So these things are very strongly influenced by climate. When we think of this logically, it does make sense that skin pigmentation, which hasn't been mentioned in this video previously, does differ for climate, as you can see here. It's interesting that when we consider the parallels between these findings and those of skin pigmentation in populations, we can see the influence that climate does have on human physical adaptation. We have covered skin tone adaptations in a previous video, so pay that a visit, but before you do, leave a like on this video in return for a 3-second blooper reel of me messing up my recording. Open and wide nose evolutionary trait in Kloluk. So how does this relate to you and why should we care? How the differences in nose shape and size between populations link to the aesthetics and attractiveness of an individual is a whole nother can of worms. We're of the belief that there is no perfect nose shape, but there are aggravating and mitigating factors to attractiveness. Unlike a jaw, which can have different levels of protrusion and misalignment that can decrease or increase your attractiveness, quite linearly actually and objectively. For instance, a Scandinavian can have more or less the same jaw shape as an indigenous Aboriginal. With the nose being linked to climate, there is an incredibly diverse range of shapes and types that we need to consider, making the attraction to a certain nose shape much more subjective than other parts of the face. But on the other hand, it is important that you recognize deformities from a different nose shape. Saddle noses caused by blunt force trauma, a deviated septum which can affect breathing, swollen lymph nodes, and a prominent dorsal hump that's caused by extra cartilage, weak facial development, or again, trauma, are actual deformities that can often need correction. Nasal hump correction, aka the dorsal hump, because it usually occurs at the dorsum of the nose, is the most common reason for cosmetic rhinoplasty because it's an incredibly masculinizing feature. Native Americans harmonize best with this nose shape because they have very wide and strong faces due to the tough diet and child-rearing traditions. For instance, they use cradle boards to keep infants on their backs so that their soft skulls form aesthetically strong and wide, not narrow and long skulls like some type of alien. For people of other ethnicities with more feminine features, it doesn't work as well, and so correction is often desired. So to summarize the findings of Zaidi et al.'s paper, they demonstrate that nose width, projection, and nostril size vary by geographic location, which highlights an evolutionary adaptation to people for their climate. If living in colder climates, over time, populations will have a greater proportion of people with smaller and thinner noses to avoid sucking in too much stinging cold air to protect the inner lining of their noses. On the contrary, living in warmer climates results in larger and wider noses, allowing for more intake for physical activity and to beat out the competition. So there isn't a one type fits all for nose shapes. There are deformities that need to be taken into account, and if you have them, then it's best to get that corrected. But otherwise, you should celebrate the shape that you have if it's suited for your ethnic group. Eurocentric beauty standards have pushed the ideal nose, the quote-unquote ideal, to a smaller, thinner nose. But regardless, that's a cultural topic and not a biological one, and so that's going to be another video. If you'd like to get your nose assessed to identify the differences between shape and deformity, then you can order an aesthetics report over at the Koos website. As always, leave a like if you enjoy the content and consider subscribing for more facial aesthetics based research.